I know the filmmaker. I'm a local actor, and I'm always interested in sort of helping out and doing what I can. And there's a nice little small role, and I was like, oh, good, I'll play the nice little small role. You know, that's no commitment. I'm really busy in general. So, you know, I showed up, did my, you know, early morning, freezing in the middle of February kind of thing. So I just got involved in that project, and I was around and kind of bought into the whole idea of it.
I was pretty blown away by working with Pete Rush, who was only in a single scene in Red Ink. He also did some set design on Anna's apartment with me. We worked together on that. But it was a real shame that I only got to work with him once.
He thought Pete was terrific and that it would be a really good idea to start a new project where Pete became the main focus.
So when the idea came around to do a part two, it just seemed natural that I would just keep going.
I said to Jen, why don't we use his character from the one scene in Red Ink as the pivot point and base a story around him, the same character.
Oh yeah, I remember him.
Almost in a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern sort of way.
I came up with the idea for what became Black Ink, and that was just the rough sketch of having this character who's an advice columnist and who's writing under the pseudonym of Alice, who's really his dead grandmother. When we came up with Black Ink, it was because it was complementing Red Ink and the newspaper, the ink is black.
We had this idea of this guy that gives advice but doesn't think about the advice he gives until something comes back to haunt him in that process.
We were working together and we asked Pete to come in, and the three of us started doing some brainstorming.
I was quite involved in the script, and that's probably me being a pushy actor insinuating myself, as well as sort of getting into the whole ghostwriter scenario. I started reading a lot of Dear Abby and other kind of articles just to get a sense of it, and started writing my own, pretending to be the person asking the question, and then putting myself in Justin's mind point and having to write an answer back. And a lot of that stuff actually ended up in the final script.
Sometimes a surprising gesture has what it takes to knock someone's eyes open. Luckily for you, Valentine's Day is coming up.
And we came up with some good ideas, but we were still all feeling flat, and I felt that we had really hit a wall.
We were really on the verge of scrapping the entire script. We just thought there was not enough conflict in the plot. We came up with a character whose only problem was that he didn't have enough problems.
I think this is not going to work. Maybe we're trying to force a square peg in a round hole. Then at some point, again, I was working in my bindery. I thought, well, what if we introduced a really serious problem into the story and something that had to relate to the fact that he was an advice columnist? And that was when I came up with the idea of the young woman who had been molested and him finding out later that it was his sister.
Now I have found my real father, and I'm looking forward to introducing him to the front end of my car.
And I called Chris, and he got really excited, and we decided at that point that we were going to move ahead with the story.
I worked like a maniac on that script, getting it to work, and it took a long time, but I finally finished. I got through the whole draft, and I sent it to Pete and Jen. And even at that point, I had no idea if it was working.
And I just thought, wow, this is it. You know, we've got it. We finally have got it, you know, and it was just a very exciting moment. And
once Red Ink started getting some publicity and more people saw it and saw that this film was not just another student film, a lot of people became interested, and it was much easier getting help for the next film, and it created what I like to call Red Ink groupies.
During the course of the casting process, I had actually gotten emails from total strangers wanting to be in the film. They had heard about the screenings that were happening locally. They had heard about me as a director and just wanted to be involved. And then once I handed them scripts, they really wanted to participate.
The next film was much more intense. I remember reading the script. It felt like it was a bigger project than the one that we had taken on before. There was much more dialogue, there was much more action, there were more locations, we had more actors.
The camera's going to go over there.
by the time we started shooting, and again, Chris having such a clear picture in his mind of what it was going to look like, I just felt that the caliber had kind of been raised.
The project just snowballed from there. We got a small grant to do the new story, which we were calling Black Ink, plus another story which would round out the whole thing as a triptych, even though we had very little detail for this other one yet, and we got the grant. And we started shooting.
There's the scene at the end of Black Ink, which we actually shot first, which was Justin dumping all of his letters and papers over the bridge and having them float down the creek.
It was August at the time, and I realized we're going to be shooting most of Black Ink in December, but if we're doing this scene of paper floating down the water, we have to do this now. So we actually shot all of the shots of the paper floating away on September 11th, 2004. I remember the day. It was a beautiful sunny day, and we had to avoid showing any of the leaves on the trees so that it was warm enough for us to all be in the water to get these shots done.
We have to dump it into the water.
Go ahead.
And then you get footage of it, and then retrieve all the paper before it continues down and pollutes Cuba Lake. So there we are wading in the water, picking all this stuff up.
And I actually had my biggest crew ever that day. And then the next shoot was not until December.
All right, how did that look?
I think it looked good.
So then the first shoot that we did shoot with actors was that scene on the bridge. And it was cold.
I mean, I literally remember not feeling my hands after a point. I was just numb. It was just bitter, bitter cold.
It was in the 20s, I think. And we were trying to keep Pete warm. I ended up giving him my mittens. It was like one of the first shoots, so I wasn't doing a lot of the technical stuff at that point in time. And
having these coats and things on, and the second we're about to shoot, shedding all of that stuff and trying to make myself not look red.
We were outside with no shelter for about 5 hours. We had 2 cameras and a crew of about 8.
My hands are shaking, and I'm trying to do the box, and we're doing it over and over again.
He was suffering so much. We tried to get the shoot done as soon as we could. But we got what we needed, and I'm so lucky that we shot it that day on a Saturday, because Sunday, the next day, we had a huge blizzard that stuck on the ground, and we had snow for the next month, and we never would have been able to get that stuff done.
Yeah, that's good. That's enough.
We shot Justin's apartment in my own personal apartment, and it timed out that I moved into a brand new apartment at the same time as we were doing this shoot.
Something special.
Stop.
So I had a blank slate in which to work, so I just avoided setting up my place because I knew that we were going to shoot this film there.
and your name, please?
I don't know what my name is.
We had a very specific time in the Autumn Leaves Cafe before they opened. We were fighting against daylight hours and time constraints.
Another bizarre circumstance was the scene that appears in red ink in the 3 films is longer. You see the snippet of it in red ink, but then in black ink you see what happens before and what happens after. So literally a year apart we shot those.
I'm Anna Bryn, Josh's sister. Excuse me, are either of you Justin Morgan?
We kind of had to recreate the circumstances to shoot the beginning and the after of that scene.
I had played the cameo in red ink, which I had a single line. All of a sudden I realized, now I have to play a major role in this new one. And direct.
Am I still in frame?
I think the hardest thing for Chris was when he was acting and having to worry about the directing.
Oh, and a small paper.
Kind of trusting the rest of us, because he's got that hat on the back of his head at all times, too. And
Never told me you were acting.
I'm sorry.
And I hadn't really acted since I was a kid. I had a few acting experiences in college that were absolutely miserable.
Cut.
So I knew this was going to be a giant challenge.
Having Chris both behind the camera and in front of the camera at the same time, it created an interesting dynamic because we also had Jen on the shoot a lot more behind the camera.
His vision was so clear and so direct that I felt very at ease in a lot of ways. I think it enabled me to kind of let go and start looking at things with a creative eye that I never done before. Looking at shot composition and looking at performance and making contributions about that felt really exciting.
No, it's not as far as I'm concerned. It's as far as I know. Yeah.
I would say the majority of my scenes weren't acting opposite Chris, but in some points, it was difficult. It's the kind of thing like you're rehearsing and then he runs away to go deal with some technical thing, and you're kind of like, okay, I'll imagine him here now.
And I had some really emotionally intense moments to play.
Some things aren't worth fixing.
But at the same token, I felt like we had a really open dialogue. I mean, he knew exactly what he wanted in the big picture, and then was able to translate that to the small picture, like this scene, this moment, right here, right now. And we had a really good working relationship, so, acting opposite him was easy. It was fun.
The first scene that I actually felt comfortable both acting and directing at the same time was the nude scene.
I came after work, so I kind of came in the middle of the shoot, and I had forgotten what scene we were doing.
Alrighty.
And the next thing I know, off goes their pants, and here we go into the nude scene.
Okay. Cut.
It was actually the first shoot that we were not under a time pressure to get done.
We're still rolling, so thanks. Okay, talk to you later.
And it was the first one that I was actually able to relax and just perform.
Say something. Say something. Say something.
Which we realized we were making a feature film. We wanted to make everything better. We wanted to take it to the next level.
There was a lot of complexity. How long the scenes were, how many there were, where they were taking place. There were a lot more locations and things like that.
There were just more camera setups, more tracking shots, more worries about eye line in scenes that had 3 or 4 people in them.
We were working early mornings, late nights, full days. I mean, just long hours, doing literally the same scene over and over again.
We weren't willing to settle if we didn't feel that we got the shot we needed, and there were some scenes where we did take after take to get a really little scene, but in the end we ended up with so much good footage.
David, if you could put the sticks down, put that camera away. Oliver, if you could just scoot over about 3 feet to your left.
We wound up shooting nearly double the amount of raw footage for Black Ink as we did for Red Ink.
Been blowing my brains out.
Getting black. It's called Black Ink for a reason.
I was really starting to hit burnout point towards the end of that shoot, though.
No, don't go until the door is completely open.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I'll get it, I swear.
And I feel very fortunate that Jen was actually working on the script for Catherine's story at the same time while I was shooting.